You guys, we gotta talk about your master bus. You see, I'm beginning to think that you're not showing it enough love. I mean, come on, why should the rest of the tracks have all the fun? You bought all these nice guitars and this nice drum set, you're recording these nice vocals, but this super critical last part of your chain, you're just thinking about, well, last. So in this video, I'm going to show you how I set up my master bus to be both a creative palette for tone, as well as the final microscope you need to keep quality in check. So if you please hit subscribe and like, I'd super appreciate it because it keeps this channel and this video moving. Let's go. What's up, you guys? How's it going? I'm Brad Dollar. Welcome to the channel. It's great to see you. All right, so why does the master bus matter? What happens if you're not mixing a record or something? Like, why should you even care? Well, the master bus is everywhere. It's not just in your DAW like Pro Tools or Logic or Ableton Live. It's also on that mixer you're using for your band rehearsals. It's on all the live streaming software that you might be using for your own videos. Seriously, if there's audio happening, there's probably a master bus involved somewhere. So thinking about this component in terms of your overall signal chain and not just an afterthought will set you up for success, whether you are mixing a record or you're just trying to get great guitar tones. You can use the master bus to be something that works in your favor from the get-go instead of just waiting until the end to start putting it into play. So without further ado, let's get going. I'm gonna switch over to Pro Tools for this example, but honestly, you can do this in any DAW that you have, and you can carry the same mentality over to any sort of mixer, whether it's digital or analog, to think about how you can affect and control the master bus from the very beginning. All right, so let's get right into it. First things first when it comes to the master bus. It doesn't matter where you are in the process, you can start thinking about it. But the sooner you start thinking about it, the better. No matter where you're at, beginning, middle, or end of the process of making something, any piece of music, this should be helpful. So for me, when I'm thinking about the master bus, I like to pretend that I'm actually at like an analog recording console. So I like to start out with some sort of analog console simulation. My recent favorite flavor has been the Plug-in Alliance SSL 9000J. And when it comes to the sound of an SSL, which I tend to like for that starting stage, because it's not too colored and it's not too transparent, the 9000J does a great job at that. So let's fire that up. And then no matter what the analog simulation plugin is, I kind of like to just turn everything off. It's like counterintuitive, but I don't want everything just cooking right away. And then I'll just sort of shuffle through a few different analog channels here and just pick one. And then I typically turn the virtual gain down just a little bit. So it's just a little bit of analog sauce to get it kicked off. That's where I like to start. This is it. I'll leave it just like this and then I move on. The next thing I like to put on my master bus signal chain is an EQ. And I do like really flavorful EQs, but at first I want something very utilitarian and a little bit surgical. So the FabFilter Pro Q is almost always my go-to. What I love about the Pro Q is not just how flexible it is and how you can do big cuts and big sweeps and it is impacting the tone in a positive way, but it's also surgical. I love that it has a mid-side functionality. So you can EQ just the center or just the sides, which is really nice on the master bus. When it comes to what I start doing with the Pro Q, I will filter the low end, and that's as simple as a low cut. 12 dB is a little modest. I'll go up to 18 dB and then just, I don't want a huge cut, I just want a little. And I just put it right there at 20 hertz or so. And it just helps clean up a little bit. Now from here, I'll play the track and just see if there's anything standing out that I just really have to get rid of that I haven't already treated in the mix. Now this is important. If there's some glaring frequency you're like trying to cut out of the master bus, maybe think about going back into your tracks to take care of that. But if it's just like, I just need a little bit of it out or a little more of it, then this is a great way to use this EQ at this stage in your master bus. But if you're doing big sweeps and big cuts, unless you're trying to save the day and it's like last minute, maybe think about going back to your individual tracks, individual stems, and doing the equalization there. And you may think like the human ear doesn't really hear like below 20 hertz or, above 20K, but we do feel those harmonics. We do feel the impact of those frequencies changing. So rolling things off is actually a little more pleasant to the ear. Now we're going to add a bunch of high end later, but starting with things a little more tame really does serve you better. That's a great way to use the master bus. Nice, so this is when we get into compression. And in this case, flavorful compression. I'm not looking for anything too transparent or utilitarian at this point. I want something with some flavor. If I could pick any bus compressor ever, the API 2500 is just really special. So that's what I'm gonna fire up right now. The particular one I'm going to use is the UAD X version, which works great natively. I highly recommend the UAD X Spark subscription. It's been well worth the money spent. And as I learned from the one and only Mike McGinn, I just want this thing to be working pretty efficiently and consistently, but only a little bit. So maybe just taking like 1 to 2 dB off the top all the time, but also not dipping and crushing it too much like it's an LA2A or something. The best thing about the 2500 is like you pretty much just start rolling up the threshold as it's open and it'll start working. You'll get a feel for what you want to do. On this compressor, I tend to like a slightly slower attack and a faster release. So I'll put the release on variable. I also like the old style compression type, the feed back instead of feed forward compressor style, the softer knee. And then I typically put thrust on like medium. It sounds cool. I like what it does. I don't know what the scientific definition of the thrust control is on the API 2500. I would definitely suggest you look it up, but it's useful and it gives a song more energy for sure. So try it out, play with it. And then when I get to the makeup gain, I do bring it up a little bit because I have lost a little bit of that. But also when you bring the makeup gain on this compressor, you're also affecting the threshold. So keep that in mind. Cool, nice. I'm good with that for right now. And you can play with this. Obviously you can do more or less depending on the song. So after I have some compression done, I want to move on to some sort of EQ sweetener. We already did some cuts, now let's add some flavor back into it. One of my favorite EQs recently has been the AMEK 200 from Plugin Alliance. Now, it's kind of like a Massenburg EQ, which is on the clean side, but honestly, like it does impart some really beautiful character to the sound. It's not like it's just disappearing in the mix. So when it comes to sweetening something or doing like a little more of a wider cut, I love this. You could also use like a Pultec style EQ, which I find to be really sweet on the master bus, and sometimes it's a nice final stage, but this one's like right in the middle. Obviously, you know, you want to fine tune these things as you're putting them in, go deep, explore different frequencies and see what really suits the song and the vibe and the energy you're trying to create before just settling and moving on. But what I want you to get from this video are some options for what to put on your master bus. And also, if you don't have all these plugins, that's okay. The same concepts work with stock plugins too. But really, I encourage you to go try some demos and invest in yourself, invest in your gear. If you bought a nice guitar or you bought a nice microphone, it's worth it to have some nice plugins. And these days, especially with like the UAD subscription, like it's 20 bucks a month, and you know, you would take a long time to spend all of that on the gear you would need to buy to have all that stuff. So don't be afraid to spend some money on your recording, your mixing, your creation software, because it really does pay out in the long run and saves you time and just makes you feel good in the end. So with that EQ in, let's keep going. Now after this stage, I like to compress one more time, and you can do one of two things. You can do another bus style compressor. You can be more transparent with something. You can use a multi-band compressor, which I really like to use in this stage on many mixes. In this case, I'm going to fire up another sort of like flavorful compressor to get things moving in a different way. That first compressor is kind of grabbing everything, and I want this next one just to add flavor and grab whatever's left on the transient front. And one of my favorites for this is the Shadow Hills Mastering Compressor from Plugin Alliance. The main thing that I love about this compressor is that you have access to a few different types of transformer output, metal varietals. I don't know if you're a metallurgist, but like nickel and iron and steel all sound different, and you have access to those simulations here. There's also an optical and discrete compressor, so lots of different flavors available to you. You can do it in mid-side. This thing is just super powerful. That's my last stage of compression till I get to my overall limiter, which we'll get to in just a second. But before we get there, the number one thing I've discovered over the years is that you really can't go wrong with adding too much analog simulation. There's just something about like generation loss and components and things like that that does something to sound that our ears just love. And for me, that's lately been the Studer A800. So when it comes to this plugin, one of my favorite things about it is that it's doing so much to the signal. Analog saturation, a little bit of EQ happening, there's some compression happening. And even if you're not good with using all those individual compressors, or you're just trying mixing for the first time, or you're dialing in your tone for the first time, playing with tape saturation, especially this one, will get you to a lot of places really quickly. I love this thing. I love what it does right away. Again, we probably want to tweak this a little more, but my main thing I want you to wrap your head around is imagine that we're all done mixing. We went through all that EQ and compression to get here, and now we're going down to our final reel-to-reel tape, the thing that our record is going to get pressed from. And that's what putting this Studer plugin, this tape plugin, all the way in the chain does. So play with it. I hope you love it. It's one of my favorite plugins and one of my favorite parts of building my master bus signal chain. And last but not least, no master bus signal chain, at least no modern master bus signal chain, is complete without some sort of brick wall limiter. And these days, my absolute favorite is BX Master Desk. Now, this is another one of those plugins which has a few different flavors and a few different functionalities inside of it for you to play with. And I especially love recommending it to people who are not mixers and recording engineers. Using something like this will get you to like a very finished result a lot sooner without having to know all the frequencies and know all the tricks and the ratios and things like that. And so maybe it's just the forever novice in me, but tools like this help keep you inspired without getting too in the weeds of the technical aspects of making music, keep you focused on the song, which to me is always the most important. Also, what I love about this plugin is the dynamic range meter. It kind of tells you where to keep it, and this way you know if your mix is just too compressed or not compressed enough and too dynamic. If you can keep it in that like 6 to 8 range, that like green range that it shows you, it's really helpful. But it's also not a rule. Like I definitely get my mixes in the red zone too, and it's totally fine. It sounds great. But if you are looking for a barometer on how compressed or uncompressed your mix should be, this thing's pretty helpful. Highly recommend the BX Master Desk Classic as your final stage, your final limiter in your master bus signal chain. So just to recap, we started with an analog simulation at the very top of the chain. Then we went to a EQ that we can use for more surgical and filtering type, not additive type EQ. Then to a bus compressor, which is definitely meant to be flavorful and just to shave off, 1 to 2 dB constantly. Then a flavorful EQ to add some top end, maybe scoop a little, add a little low end. Another compressor, you can use anything you want. You can use a multi-band compressor, which I like to recommend sometimes. In this example, we used the Shadow Hills mastering compressor, which is definitely both utilitarian but also flavorful. And then one more stage of some sort of analog simulation. And last but not least, some form of brick wall limiter, just something to put a nice cap on it to make things a little bit louder and to sound finished and like all the other records that are out there in the world that we love. The very last thing that I'll do when I'm at the end of mixing, and I want to make sure that what I'm doing really will translate, is I'll use some sort of frequency analyzer or some sort of like volume analyzer to see how things compare to the real world. Now, the classic easy way to do this is just to bring a reference track into your mix and play it back and forth, see how it sounds. It's the easiest way to go about it. If you love a Tame Impala song and you want your song to sound like that, pull that thing up, put yours next to it and go back and forth. Like if it has more mid-range, add that. If it has less high-end, take that away, But you can also use some plugins to do that. I love the Adapter series of plugins. There are 2 that I love. One is Streamliner. You can also check out Metric AB, as you can pull your reference tracks in here and really know and see what the difference is. But even if you don't have reference tracks, you can use Metric AB to see what the overall loudness is, especially compared to specific outcomes. Everything from Spotify and YouTube to the Depth Magnetic Master. There's lots of different tools you can use. These are just 2 of them. I love these because they're with the Plugin Alliance bundle, which is very accessible and very affordable, and these are very accurate, useful tools. But any kind of measurement analyzer you want to put in after the master bus to see how things are going, whether it's on your monitor channel or it's before, I highly recommend it, but just make sure you take them off so that they're not in your signal path when you actually go to print and finalize your track. Cool, so that's it. That's my master bus signal chain. There's lots of different plugins you can use. These are the ones that I have access to and the ones that I just love to use, quite frankly, but whatever you have and whatever you can get or get trials to, please give it a shot, and I'll drop all of these down in the description below to make it easier to find and easier to recall. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this video helpful and that it gave you some fresh ideas on how to think about your master bus. I'd love to know what you're doing on your master bus. And after you watch this video, when you explore a few things, let me know what you find out. So thank you so much for being here and watching. Please hit subscribe. Seriously, it means a lot to me and I couldn't do this channel without you. Thanks for being here. Thanks for doing that. Until next time, see you again. Bye-bye.